For some people, adolescence can be the most tumultuous period of life. It's a time of immense change, both physically and emotionally, and is filled with many external pressures, pushing young adults in different directions. Therapy is one resource that can help, but sometimes the right intentions, mixed with a mentality of tough love, can end up doing more damage than good. In these extreme scenarios, employees from youth rehabilitation programs travel to the home in the middle of the night and whisk away teens who have little idea what's happening. They're taken away from their families and everything they know, all in an effort to get them back on the right track.
When a child or a teenager is on a path of self-destruction or wayward behavior or a streak of maleficence, parents often turn to what are known as behavioral treatment programs or emotional growth schools. And they take the form of either therapeutic boarding schools or residential treatment facilities, which are sometimes ranches, and then wilderness experiential therapy programs.
That's Kenneth R. Rosen. He's currently a senior editor and correspondent for Newsweek and is the author of Troubled, the Failed Promise of America's Behavioral Treatment Programs. But before Rosen was a successful journalist, he was a troubled teen who skipped school, went out drinking, and was largely out of control. Looking back now, he says that many of these stunts stemmed from larger family issues that were happening at the time.
For a mother who was going through a divorce and was seeking to raise myself and my sister, it was not an easy household. And everyone was at a loss to help me. The teachers at my school, the guidance counselors at my school, therapists that my mother sent me to, inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation facilities all really turned up with their hands upward and said, we're not sure we can help this kid. And it was at that point that my mom was approached by an education consultant who was referred to her by someone at my high school, who then told her of these behavioral modification, tough love treatment programs. And they marketed them as a silver bullet to fix me, right? There was this one option that all you had to do was send your son or daughter away to this program, and they'd end up a year, 2 years later, better off than when they went in.
With this in mind, Rosen's mom signed off on this type of therapy, truly believing that this difficult experience would help her 16-year-old son. Over the next 288 days, Rosen shuffled through 3 different programs in various states. The first was out in the wilderness and focused on hard manual labor and repetitive therapeutic exercises in order to provide teens with structure.
For the wilderness program, we spent our days hiking, just hiking 5-10 miles. In between those hikes, we would stop and counselors would quiz us on our emotions and try to hold impromptu therapy sessions and pick our brains apart in sort of a constant rolling therapy. We would have to build fires and set up camp, and if we didn't do it within a certain amount of time, we would face consequences. We would oftentimes, before dinner, be told we needed to write a journal, which was more or less a sort of letter to the counselors recounting our emotional state. And we were expected to use all the terminology of treatment, justification, rationalizing, internalizing, all these words that weren't really fitting in with our vocabulary as wayward teenagers. But if we hadn't completed the diary on time or in a way that the counselor saw was sufficient to meet some obscene or obscure need, we wouldn't be able to have dinner. We'd have to rewrite the entire diary.
This prison-style environment ingrained in Rosen that he was a bad egg. Rather than receiving understanding and compassion in order to deal with past trauma, Rosen was met with the belief that he was past the point of help.
You're labeled a troubled teen, and you're reminded over and over again that you've led a life of irreparable damage, that you become that troubled teen regardless. There's no sort of hope there. They break you down, but they never build you back up.
This isolating tough love treatment plan that goes on for months or years on end takes a toll. It cements the notion that these teens are nothing better than the havoc they wreak. Rosen says this results in the cycle only continuing into adulthood, where the consequences are far greater.
The idea of the programs was to prevent children from going into the criminal justice system. It was meant to prevent and stem any bad actions that could lead to death or harm to themselves or others. And unfortunately, it ended up leading a lot of former clients into the criminal justice system, to say nothing of the myriad deaths of despair that would come from overdose, from murder, from suicide. And I found the irony in this when I was then, after returning home from these programs, 6 months later, admitted to a juvenile delinquent center for a crime that I had committed, and was more comfortable there than I was back in those other programs.
And the cycle continues today. Many of these private therapeutic businesses operate in states across the country and charge a heavy price tag for their services. Despite reports of abuse and manipulation, they have free rein, running largely under the radar and rarely ever discussed in the public eye because the topic is taboo.
We've seen these accusations of sexual abuse and physical abuse for decades now, and despite Government Accountability Office reports, despite local state investigations, nothing has changed. They still proliferate, and they still continue to draw in billions of dollars a year, and I think the only way that we can work to better the programs is not necessarily investigating them further, but turning back to the family unit. If we can starve them of the income, if we can levy sanctions against them in that way, having people focused on community-based treatment, having the families in therapy together, and working to mend and repair whatever broken parts of a child's experience led to these wayward behaviors, then we would see the dissolution of those programs and the hurt that is wrought on those children.
The main reason these programs are still around is because they appeal to desperate parents who've run out of options. From the outside, they're marketed as secluded, state-of-the-art therapeutic rehabilitation centers that focus on the mind and body. But inside closed doors, it's a much different story that never really tackles the heart of the problem.
We're asked to learn a whole different set of rules, only to come back to a situation, the home life, that hasn't changed. And the home life has often been the cause and the reason why these children were sent away. They have broken home lives. They're in foster care, or they're with their grandparents, their parents are on drugs, maybe they were abused by a family member or a close friend, and then they're asked to change because the problem is seen to be on their shoulders, when in fact it's the environment in which they were raised.
Ultimately, Rosen broke out of this cycle of being in the system and was able to get the compassionate help he needed. He eventually found a purpose in life through his career and self-growth, and this propelled him forward. But even today, he still works through the depression, anxiety, and the lasting trauma of those years.
A lot of former clients from these programs refer to themselves as survivors, and I understand where they're coming from, but I also disagree, because survivor means that it's over, that they've made it through something, and while they've made it through the programs and the treatment, there's still these lasting effects that are reverberating into their late 20s and early 30s.
All in all, he views the experience as part of who he is today and hopes to spread awareness about the damaging effects of these programs so parents understand the true extent of what they're signing off on.
Most of the more than 100 or so interviews I conducted for Troubled, it seemed that most people forgave their parents. There were very few instances where there was animosity toward their parents. Same goes for me. I don't hold it against them for making this decision. They wanted to improve my life, and they did everything they could in their power, and I commend them for that. I just don't think that they were educated enough, and I think the programs weren't being honest in what sort of treatment was being given at these programs for them to make an informed decision.
To find out more about this topic, helpful therapeutic resources, and our guest, Kenneth R. Rosen, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can also check out his new book, Troubled: The Failed Promise of America's Behavioral Treatment Programs, available online and in bookstores. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price.
Did you know 1 in 4 small businesses will close due to cash flow difficulties or lack of access to capital? But they don't have to. According to Lauren Schifrin of Revolution Capital, the country's leading provider of factoring and cash flow financing, there's a safe and easy way to access your capital immediately without hurting your bottom line.
It's called factoring. We buy your invoices and pay you same day. That provides you with the immediate liquidity and access to the capital you need to grow your business. Because now more than ever, companies should have a finance partner that's on their side.
Revolution Capital provides flexible funding options to small to medium-sized businesses that would like immediate access to capital, and they respect your business relationships to help you succeed and grow. Find out more at revinc.com. That's REVINC.com.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.
Coming up on Viewpoints.
Europa's ocean might harbor complex life, and that's probably the only place in the solar system where you can say that.
The journey to Jupiter's icy moon Europa and why it matters. Then,
we have this mentality in our classroom that we're all in this together, no matter what it is, whether it's math class or whatever's going on in the world.
The benefits of learning back in person. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.